Buenas tardes, vamos a dar comienzo a la
Good afternoon. We're going to be beginning our fourth session. As you know, this session deals with Christina of Sweden. I'm very happy to introduce to you this afternoon's first speaker, who is Theresa Kutasz Christensen from the Baltimore Museum of Art, working currently on an exhibition which will surely be of great interest. As she is a specialist in history of women in the art market, has worked and continues to work researching for Christina Academium, which fosters greater expertise in the life and history of Queen Christina of Sweden. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you very much for that generous introduction. I want to start out by thanking the Museo del Prado for putting on this wonderful set of programs, to Paloma Malagashaw for the hospitality, and to Noelia for almost being finished getting through this set of talks, which have been absolutely fantastically composed. Thank you. In April of 1632, with the 30 Years' War dragging on, King Gustav Adolf II of Sweden advanced his troops across northern Germany, occupying the city of Augsburg. While there, the king was presented with an extraordinary cabinet of curiosities constructed by a team of local artisans under the direction of collector Philip Hainhofer. The cabinet was shipped back to Sweden along with a carpenter who served as the cabinet's curator for the rest of his life. While the cabinet arrived in Stockholm in 1633, Gustav Adolf was not so fortunate, losing his life in the Battle of Lutzen in the winter of 1632. The spectacular Augsburg cabinet, with its ebony veneer and over 1,000 miniature objects of art, nature, and knowledge, was inherited along with the throne of Sweden by Gustav's 6-year-old daughter, Christina. Raised with the knowledge that she would rule once she reached her majority, Christina received a so-called princely education in falconry, languages, and classical history. Records of her lessons indicate that she studied strong leaders, such as Alexander the Great, who Christina would later write about and adopt as a personal hero. She also studied contemporary models of female rulership, such as Elizabeth I. As a young woman, her primary exposure to the style of encyclopedic collecting popular across Europe was her extensive explorations of the Augsburg cabinet. This all changed in November of 1648, when on the eve of the signing of the Treaty of Westphalia to end the 30 Years' War, Christina's troops marched on Prague, ransacking the libraries of the nobility and taking what remained of the famous Kunstkammer of Rudolf II. In a single maneuver, the 21-year-old Christina owned one of the most prominent art collections in Europe. Her miniature Wunderkammer was eclipsed vastly in scale by the 470 paintings, 69 bronzes, and hundreds of works in ivory, amber, coral, precious stones, coins, foreign curiosities, books, manuscripts, and mathematical instruments that arrived from Prague. My talk today will provide a summary of Christina's primary interests and motivations as a collector and patron of the arts. After outlining her transformation of the Swedish royal collections, I will explore the Queen's self-fashioning through objects, following her shocking 1654 abdication of the Swedish throne and her conversion to Catholicism, along with her permanent reestablishment of both court and collections in Rome. An astonishing volume of archival documentation related to Christina's life as a patron and collector has allowed us to reconstruct many of her acquisitions and displays, and to continue the ongoing work of tracing the dissolution of her collections. While many of the artworks owned by Christina are extant and readily identified in museum collections, many more are now lost, known only to us through letters between Christina and her art agents, travel diaries of visitors to her palaces, and 7 primary inventories created in Prague, Stockholm, Amsterdam, and Rome. The Amsterdam inventory documents all of the works shipped out of Sweden when she abdicated, and an inventory made by the Odescalchi family, who purchased Christina's collection from her heirs, tells us what the queen owned at the time of her death. Together, these documents paint a strong picture of Christina's taste and her shifting aims as both a patron and collector. They also serve as an invaluable resource for the more than 50 major institutions like the Prado, which can trace works from their collections back to the galleries of the Swedish queen. Due to her unconventional biography, which is lacking many of the key factors that dictated the somewhat prescribed idealized expectations of self-presentation for royal women, as excellently discussed yesterday by Ellie Whitaker, Christina is often portrayed in popular culture as a wild Amazon, a barbarian queen, overtly sexually assertive, a social deviant, or a masculinized caricature. In an illustrated biography of 1708, Christina is shown dallying with the Cardinal Deccio Azzolino. In Greta Garbo's 1933 film, Queen Christina, she kisses Ebba, her lady-in-waiting, while also seducing the envoy from Spain. In character designs for the 2016 video game Civilization VI, she is a bookish tomboy. In the 2015 film, The Girl King, based off the play of the same name, she is an aggressive lover amidst the Prague booty. And in a 2022 French graphic novel by a pair of Belgian writers based off the same play, she shocks French philosopher Descartes with her barbarity. Many of these presentations stem from gossip in broadsheets printed by her detractors during her lifetime, as well as gender-biased 19th and 20th century sources, and the continued marketability of the sensationalized mythology that has grown to define her popular biography. In recent years, some scholars, as well as feminist artists, such as Liv Stromquist, have begun to push back against the most invasive investigations into the Queen's body, particularly critiquing exhumation of her remains in the grottos of St. Peter's to check for signs of intersexuality in 1965. It is true that Christina was an exception in many regards. A queen with no throne, a woman uninterested in marriage or children, a Protestant ruler turned trophy convert for the Catholic Church, and a multilingual patron of arts and knowledge, who prioritized pictures over piety. She owned not one, but 2 of the largest antiquities collections built by an early modern woman. As a collector, though, Christina did not strive for exceptionalism. Rather, she worked hard throughout her life to develop her taste with the goal of masterfully assimilating into the established culture of collecting among the European elite, notably elite men. The works she presented in her galleries were not only a signal to others of her successful entree into that tradition, but as we will see, were also conceived of as an extension of her carefully crafted public persona. The royal collection that Christina inherited as a young queen included impressive collections of tapestries, as well as paintings and books. However, it was not considered notable on an international scale. The integration of the Prague booty was just part of sweeping changes made to the composition of the royal collections and to the cultural prominence of the Swedish court under Christina. In the years immediately surrounding her coronation celebrations in 1650, numerous projects were commissioned. Among others, these included works from Flemish sculptor Artis Cornelius, the medalists Eric Preys and Sebastian Dadler, painter David Beck, painter and sculptor Nicolas Valieri, Flemish painter Jacob Jordans, and leading tapestry weavers in Amsterdam and Delft, Pieter de Kracht and Bartholomew van der Gucht. The Queen danced in French ballets staged at her court, imported musicians from Italy, and began a lifelong career as a significant patron of opera and theater, a love likely depicted here in theatrical portrait of her as Minerva by Rubens' pupil Justus von Egmont. In Rome, Christina's patronage would extend to other women, even when their appearance on stage was banned by the Pope. The ephemeral aspects of her coronation extended beyond feast, music, and poetry to include a full-scale replica of the Arch of Constantine made of pasteboard, which underscored her imperial role, and floats representing the Muses with Apollo atop Mount Parnassus, which was the mythological home of poetry, music, and learning. This acknowledged her role as a patron of the arts. Many of the performed and produced pieces commissioned around the Queen's coronation set up her allegorical associations with Minerva, Apollo, the sun, and the Muses. The sun motif, which I will note was used here before its first use by Louis, can be seen at left in a medal for her coronation and would later follow the Queen for the rest of her life, observed in medals at right produced in Rome in the 1670s and 1680s. Often called the Minerva of the North, Christina was associated with two primary aspects of the goddess in imagery: knowledge and as a peacemaker. To reference her sponsorship of learning and her signing of the treaty to end the 30 Years' War. The Queen worked hard to draw notable men of letters and artists to her court, enticing many with the manuscripts and books that she had acquired. Her overtures were successful, luring artists such as French painter Sébastien Bourdon to Stockholm. Most of her often noted visitors was the philosopher René Descartes, who famously did not survive his first northern winter as Christina's tutor. Also attracted from France was Christina's librarian, Raphael Trichet du Fresne, who dedicated his first edition of his 1651 publication of Leonardo's Treatise on Painting to the Queen. An inventory made by du Fresne, begun in 1652, breaks Christina's Swedish collections into groups which include a wide variety of object types. By the time that inventory was completed, Christina owned an estimated 770 paintings. That is nearly double the number that had arrived from Prague just a few years earlier. The expansion represents works that were already in the royal collection, paintings she commissioned, as well as acquisitions she made through agents in the Netherlands. The total number of purchases Christina made in Stockholm can never be fully confirmed due to the loss of a portion of the royal collections in the fire of the Tre Kronor Palace in 1697. A brief look at Christina's relationship with her agents will aid in better understanding her influence and her taste as a young collector. From Sweden, Christina employed a diverse array of specialists, diplomats, artists, as well as well-connected connoisseurs who made purchases for her across Europe. Numerous large-scale acquisitions were made on her behalf between 1648 and 1652 by agents including Michael Leblanc, Harold Applebaum, Peter Spearing von Silverkrone, Pierre Badal, Malthaeus Polietsky, Nicholas Hensius, Isaac Vucius, and Jeremias Falk. Their frequent missives address her often very specific requests while constantly looking to her for funds and approvals to continue their hunt. In some cases, the works that arrived did not meet her tastes and expectations and were eventually sent back. Such was the case for a selection of at least 11 paintings by Georg Dau, acquired for the Queen by the Swedish commissioner in The Hague, Peter Spearing, who was a personal supporter of the artist, but whose esteem for Northern masters was not shared by Christina. That Christina declined to keep the works by Dau, a successful pupil of Rembrandt, is an often repeated example of her preference for Italian art. In a 1653 letter to fellow collector Paolo Giordano Orsini, the Duke of Bracciano, Christina describes the Prague booty, telling him of her, quote, infinite range of works by Northern masters, but that, quote, apart from 30 or 40 Italian originals, I discount them all. Christina goes on to say that she would exchange all of the works by Northern masters, quote, for 2 Raphaels, and I think that even this would be doing them too much honor. Having famously acquired the cream of her collection in bulk through conquest, Christina's posturing through her spirited rejection of the Dutch and Flemish schools, while likely a true reflection of her taste, was also a statement in which she sought to prove her merit as a young, untraveled collector. Her Vasarian zeal for Italian art, her lifelong pursuit of antiquities, as well as her curation of allegorical associations such as that of Minerva, situated her, Christina, Queen of the Goths and the Vandals, firmly within the classical tradition. Her transport of Rudolph's Italian paintings to Rome won her favor among fellow art lovers, who celebrated their return to Italy, setting Christina up as a preserver of the art of Italy, not a barbarian invader. Many of Christina's purchases across all media came from Leblon, who was trained as a silversmith and spent time in Italy, developing his connoisseurial skills with his cousin, the artist Joachim Sandrart. An avid collector himself, Leblon was instrumental in negotiating several large purchases. It was through him that Christina acquired some of the only extant marbles which were part of her sizable antiquities collection in Sweden. Now part of Gustav III's Museum of Antiquities in the Swedish Royal Palace, these works were purchased as a group from the collection of Burgomaster Nicholas Rocco in Amsterdam. Both the frequency and volume of letters sent by Christina indicate her direct involvement and personal interest in her acquisitions. This is seen in her aborted attempt to purchase the Reinst collection of marbles originating from the Vendramin estate in Venice, which was ultimately passed over by the Queen in favor of the acquisition of works from Rome. Malthaeus Palbetsky, who was primarily a diplomat, later served as the Swedish ambassador to Spain and was sent on a mission to Venice in 1649. Despite the ostensibly official capacity of his travel, his frequent letters to Christina concern large purchases of marbles that he was orchestrating for her in Rome to be shipped out of Livorno. This was the same moment that Diego Velázquez was in Italy working to secure works for the Spanish crown. However, Palbetsky seems not to have been directed to inquire after plasters, and instead may have had more mixed success than the Spanish painter in locating things to export. Similar to Palbetsky's letters, frequent communications came from classical scholar Nicholas Heinsius that show both the far-reaching desires of Christina as a lover of books, as well as the difficulties of acquiring remotely through intermediaries. Heinsius worked with Isaac Vucius, a rare book collector and Christina's librarian, to locate books, manuscripts, coins, and medals for the Queen in Italy. In the spring of 1652, Heinsius was on an extended acquisition trip. He updates Christina on ongoing negotiations for a large purchase, such as cabinets of antique coins and carved antique gems from Cardinal Girolamo Boncompagni, and responds to her request to be put in contact with notables, such as the antiquary Cassiano del Pozzo. Christina's letter writing with Heinsius concerning books continued long after her relocation to Rome, as did many of her relationships with her agents in the Low Countries, creating an under-recognized continuity between her two collections. The impact of Christina's abdication on the royal collections in Sweden has long been overstated, with the notable exception of her decimation of the spectacular Renaissance tapestry collections. While she did take the best Italian paintings, only 104 of the nearly 800 paintings in the Queen's Swedish collection made the trip to Rome with her. Far from robbing the country of her birth blind, Christina left a considerable impact as a collector. A badly damaged pair of panel paintings, which long decorated a church near Lidköping, are now in the collection of the Statens Historiska Museet. These feature Durer's Adam and Eve and were copied by an anonymous artist just before Christina gifted the originals to Philip IV of Spain. A large collection of bronzes by Dutch sculptor Adrian de Vries arrived with the Prague booty but were too large or too heavy to ship to Rome. Today they can be seen by appointment at the de Vries Museum at Drottningholm Palace. A testament to her lasting artistic impact in Sweden, visitors to the gardens at Drottningholm can enjoy copies of some of the most famous antique marbles from Christina's installations in the Palazzo Riario in Rome. These copies of works are now in the collection of the Prado and were purchased and installed by Swedish King Gustav III in an 18th century homage to Christina. Before the late 1640s, there was no Swedish royal antiquities collection to speak of. By the time Christina abdicated, there were over 160 marbles, both antique and modern. There are no marbles noted on the inventory of works Christina shipped to Amsterdam, indicating that virtually all were left behind in Sweden. But one of the lone exceptions to this is a bust of Minerva, now in the collection of the Prado, which has been proposed by some to have come from the Reinst collection, separated by the Queen due to its favorable subject. In order to fund her abdication and her travel, many works Christina collected were utilized by the Queen as payment or collateral for services. Several of her tapestries were used as collateral for money she owed Mazarin after a stay at Fontainebleau, while a cabinet of coins was pawned in the Low Countries to offset costs of her extended stay there in 1655. At least 13 crates of books and mathematical instruments were used as payment to Dufresne, which were added to his significant personal collection, now in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. Similarly, Christina gifted Vusius several significant texts, including the incredible Codex Argentus, or Silver Bible, a 6th century Gothic language translation of the Bible, written in gold and silver ink on purple-stained vellum. It is now in the collection of the Carolina Rediviva Library at Uppsala. The volume was likely written for the Gothic King Theodoric and came into Christina's possession as part of the Prague booty. Her readiness to give up a work so rich in her own history points to her broad preference for classical themes and her curation of her collections to attract the kinds of academicians, scholars, and artists that she aimed to surround herself with once she reached Rome. After removing her own crown and leaving Sweden incognito, Christina spent over a year traveling before finally converting publicly to Catholicism at Innsbruck, officially opening the door to her relocation to Rome. In Innsbruck, she was met by Lucas Holstenius, the Vatican librarian. After a formal feast in her honor on the eve of her public conversion, Christina was brought to Ambras Castle in the hills above Innsbruck, where she visited the Archduke Ferdinand's collection of medals, curiosities, and ancient manuscripts. This visit, like Pope Alexander II's decision to send his librarian as envoy, explicitly played on the Queen's love of art and learning. The entertainments which were developed for Christina on her long trip to Rome demonstrate that her hosts did their homework on the Queen, making arrangements for feasts, music, and theater, along with visits to curiosity cabinets, libraries, and horseback riding. In Ferrara, Christina opened public discourse with the Duke and Duchess on the subject of Bernini and Pietro da Cortona. In her opinion, they were the best artists in Rome. This is an observation gleaned from reports on the Roman art scene sent to her in advance by the Duke of Bracciano. At dinner, she discussed the architecture of Europe's great cathedrals, unsurprisingly selecting St. Peter's in Rome as far superior to both St. Paul's in London and the Dome of Milan, though I'll note she had seen none of them. Passing through Romagna, the entertainments appear to have been equally suited to the Queen's interests. Academies and discourses were organized in 5 languages to enter the Queen in both Faenza and Cessna. While the entertainments derived for her along her route to Rome were impressive, her official arrival in December of 1655 was an extraordinary occasion. The Queen entered the Papal City, aside a carriage designed by Bernini, through the Porta del Popolo, recently renovated by Bernini with a dedication to the Queen. Her arrival was a major coup for Alexander VII, who waited at the end of the parade route to receive her at the Vatican. The procession was followed by months of celebrations and scheduled visits and introductions to locations like the Capitoline collections, where you can still see this plaque installed to mark her observation of the splendors of antiquity. At the College of the Jesuits, she was met with fellow collectors such as Athanasius Kircher, and she was gifted volumes for her library as well as a small engraved obelisk. During her initial stay in Rome, before eventually settling in the Palazzo Riario, now called the Corsini Gallery. Christina was housed at the Palazzo Farnese. Its prestigious antique sculpture collection was not yet removed to Naples. One of the most often repeated stories about Christina is the allegation that as soon as she saw the modesty draperies or fig leaves that Alexander VII and her hosts had put on the marble collections, she tore them off in order to gawk at what lay underneath. This lascivious breach of female decorum plays into both stereotypes of her inherently barbarous nature as a northerner, as well as the tendency to overtly sexualize certain aspects of her biography. On the exterior of the Farnese Palace, a temporary facade had been added in the anticipation of her arrival. Margaret Kunst has analyzed the facade's virginal themes, discussing them as part of a plan by the Pope to mold the newly arrived and converted Queen's public image to fit his own political and social agendas. As seen in her enthusiastic pursuit of classical sculpture and mythological paintings, the Renaissance drawings and the recognition of these traits on her travels to Rome, Christina's ability to acquire and appreciate art was central to the public image she constructed and nurtured as an educated and informed patron of the arts. Although determined not to marry, she did not foreground her virginity as rulers such as Elizabeth did. If the statues inside were covered at the behest of the Pope to protect the unmarried queen's modesty, the incident of their removal should be understood as Christina's establishment of autonomy as a secular queen in Rome through a public declaration of her learned appreciation of one of the city's greatest collections and her abilities as a connoisseur of ancient art. The Farnese marbles would serve as a backdrop to Christina's quick establishment of the first of the academies she founded in Rome, the most notable being the still extant Arcadian Academy. While she had no populace to rule, Christina retained the social power inherent in the title of queen and therefore had to navigate how to assert and display power. In many cases, what has been noted in her biographies as a lack of decorum was in fact small assertions of status owing to her unique position. Not the least of these was the Monaldeschi incident, where as a guest staying in France, Christina had a purported spy executed in the Gallery de Surf at Fontainebleau. She was asserting her right as queen to order such measures. This was not received well. In Rome, Christina had to manage her changing relationships with successive popes, and she relied extensively on the manufacture of power and majesty through objects and patronage to maintain her royal image, as it was one of the few factors constant and under her own control. Although she did renovate the Palazzo Riario, she rented the building and therefore lacks the background that many other art lovers of her stature have as patrons of major chapels, architectural projects, or fresco cycles. The primary focus on her as a patron and collector, as well as her love of theater and music, is therefore the primary way we can understand her assertion of power through collecting. Her paintings collection tripled in scale from what she had initially brought from Rome, with over 300 paintings in her posthumous inventories. In her purchases, she was assisted by her friend and fellow collector, Cardinal Deccio Azzolino, along with a cohort of advisors, including her librarian antiquarian, Giovanni Bellori. He was former antiquarian to the Pope. These contacts helped the Queen to diversify her pursuit of works. From descriptions of the Palazzo Riario during Christina's residency, we can imagine galleries that introduced visitors to the Queen through a carefully constructed program of allegorical, historic, religious, and mythological imagery, which conveyed her knowledge and her taste. Letters sent between the Queen and Azzolino, while the Queen was undertaking extended travel, outline her active involvement in both the construction and decoration of her galleries in Rome. The entirety of the Piano Terreno was dedicated to her collection of antique sculpture and modern works after the antique by leading artists such as Nicolas Cordier, Francesco Maria Nocchieri, Ercole Ferrata, as well as Giulio Cartari in the workshop of Bernini. From her first days in Rome, Christina curated a relationship of mutual respect and admiration with Bernini. She owns several works by him, including paintings and a now lost Mirror of Truth. The work is now known only through descriptions and drawings, such as this example in the Royal Collection in London. Her paintings were displayed throughout the Piano Nobile, with her prized works by Venetian masters covering the walls of the Grand Gallery from floor to ceiling. A bust of Christina by Bernini was noted to have been kept in her bedroom, where today the Corsini Gallery has a plaque commemorating the Queen's life and a portrait of Christina in the guise of Diana. Christina found ample opportunity in Rome to indulge her love of the antique. She's one of only a handful of women documented to have received papal sanctions for excavations, and by my estimation, not counting her well-appointed coin cabinets and the hundreds of sculptural, epigraphic, and architectural fragments uninventoried in the garden, the Palazzo Riario contained at least 208 sculptural marbles that were ancient, restored antique fragments, or copies after the antique, plus 80 columns in both the galleries and the garden. Christina was reported to have established a sculpture studio on the grounds in order to nurture the art form, which she saw as one of Rome's greatest cultural contributions. This somewhat complicates a final count of her collection, as works observed by visitors and listed in earlier inventories as fragmentary may have later been combined or restored. A visitor coming to the Riario from the main courtyard would arrive at a U-shaped courtyard with a portico that faced the slope of the Janiculum Hill. They would enter the first of 10 rooms in the summer apartments to a colossal statue of sun god Apollo and a figure then identified as Cleopatra, who welcomed guests to the galleries as stand-ins for Christina's queenship and the light of knowledge. Each room was packed with sculptures, most on pedestals, with busts standing on small columns or occasionally on the floor. The left wing of the palace was bounded by a secret garden full of sculptural fragments, creating a fluid indoor-outdoor exchange, enhanced by woven tapestries of woodlands ordered by Christina. While every room contained numerous notable works supporting themes of knowledge and power, the 5th and 6th rooms are the most often discussed, as they contained immersive theatrical presentations, which placed visitors as well as the Queen within mythological vignettes. And I'm sure we will hear a bit more about the sculptures in these rooms in the talks to come. The first of these rooms had a set of 8 muses, now at the Prado. And in the following room, an image of Helios was painted on the ceiling with the statue of Clytia reaching eternally for him from the center of the space. A large collection of statues encircled the room to join the visitor as witness to the event. The final 2 rooms of the suite were small, with the penultimate space sparsely decorated only with busts of the Queen. This served as a sort of visual signature, punctuating the collection and emphasizing her authorship and ownership of the galleries. Viewers' experience of Christina's displays would have been informed and influenced by their prior image of her, developed through the many media she was put forward on, including prints and medals. As in these media, classical history themes were popular subjects in her paintings. Although she did also collect religious works, they were particularly appealing to the Queen if they were by Italian masters or by favored artists who placed her collections in conversation with other prominent royal collections, such as paintings by Rubens. As you can see here, Christina owned paintings by a long list of Italian painters. While some of these works have undergone numerous reattributions since their appearance on inventories from which this list is drawn, the quality of her assembled collection is attested to by the strong presence of her in the walls of premier collections today. Christina is often seen as an opportunist collector, due in large part to her most famous acquisition being the Prague booty. However, less than half of the paintings she brought with her from Sweden to Rome were taken from Prague. By the time of her death, only 1/6 of the paintings in her Roman galleries were from the Prague booty. Although these receive a disproportionate amount of attention through commentary that strips the queen of agency in the formation of her own collection. In this respect, the Prado's project to locate the impact of women on the formation of the collection might be seen to have a curious parallel in the extended scholarly project of locating the impact and agency of Christina within her own collections. Recent scholarship has shown that a series of Holtzius drawings were not war booty as was long assumed, but rather were purchased on the market in the Netherlands by Christina. Due to their high quality, even her heirs in Rome assumed her well-curated list of Renaissance tapestries with gold threads depicting subjects such as the wonders of the world, Caesar, Alexander the Great, Scipio, Antony and Cleopatra, and the huntress Diana, were from the imperial collection in Prague. But these panels were in fact produced by the robust Swedish history of collecting tapestry and producing tapestries, as well as the Queen's own commissions and her purchases. Christina's choice to fill her galleries with classical heroes and mythological scenes, as well as antique marbles, was perfectly in line with her public image. While this mirrored the format of many of the period's greatest collections, it was not reflective of the choices of many other early modern women, whose purchases and commissions were frequently religious in nature, underscoring key feminine virtues of piety and devotion. In her desire to have a gallery on par with the best in Europe, Christina structured her collection after more traditional, but as we saw in Sheila Barker's talk today, not exclusively masculine presentations of autonomy and power. She did not demur from displaying works with nudity or titillating themes, remaining consistent in this respect since her first days in Rome amongst the undraped statues in the Piazza Farnese. Just as Christina had at least 4 marble statues restored as flora on the ground floor, she owned numerous painted works of the same subject, offering the opportunity for discourses in her galleries on the merits of each artist. A case in point, the Queen owned a stunning pair of paintings depicting the abduction of Ganymede, both now in Vienna. The first of these is a copy after Michelangelo, and the second is one of 2 depictions of the subject made by Rubens. The other, made for the Torre della Parada, is now here in the collections of the Prado. In addition to a 2nd century Roman Leda displayed in the penultimate main sculpture gallery of her ground floor suite, along with a crouching Venus and numerous other works, Christina owned several significant paintings of the subject of Leda's encounter with Jupiter as a swan that resulted in the hatching of the twins Castor and Pollux. This included a version by Andrea del Sarto, now in Brussels, which was a copy after the well-known Leda original by Leonardo that Christina may have seen when she was a guest at Fontainebleau. In many cases, the erotic subject matter of images of Leda, as in the example by Leonardo, led to the destruction of works by later owners for moralizing reasons. This was also the case in a version of the subject by Correggio, which was commissioned as part of a set of the Loves of Jupiter for Federico Gonzaga in Mantua, and mentioned by Vasari in his Lives of the Artists. Acquired through separate channels, Christina owned 2 of the works from the Loves of Jupiter set, also holding a Danae by the artist, now in the collection of the Galleria Borghese in Rome. Correggio's Leda was part of the collection of Philip II of Spain before the work was eventually transferred to Rudolf II in Prague and on to Christina. A later owner, less accepting than Christina of the work's provocative imagery, slashed the painting, destroying the face of the protagonist. The current reconstruction of the version owned by Christina was made in part possible by a copy produced while the painting was in Spain in the Prado's collection. Like her sculptures, Christina acquired her paintings through varied means, with many of her modes of access to the market obscured by time. Living artists such as Bernini and Guercino she knew personally, while other works were purchased through large sales and collections she had developed ties to, such as the Duke of Bracciano and the Ludovisi. As it would be impossible to review in 45 minutes every known work from Christina's paintings collection, these 4 paintings, once owned by Christina and now all in the collection of the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge, provide a convenient representative sample of her acquisition methods. 2 of the works, the Veronese and the Titian, entered Christina's collection with the Prague booty. The Venus and Cupid by Palma il Vecchio is noted in Christina's collections for the first time, with its earlier 150 years of provenance still unknown today. The St. Roch and the Angel came from the collection of Prince Niccolo Ludovisi, who died in 1664, beginning the dispersal of his family's renowned collections. While a large number of pictures were willed to Philip IV of Spain, Christina eventually acquired several pieces, including the Carracci in Cambridge. Additionally, she purchased a significant portion of the Ludovisi collection of antique sculptures, including works such as the Castor and Pollux, known as the San Ildefonso group. These came through an intermediary owner, Cardinal Massimi, who was a fellow collector, and helped her in her pursuit of antiquities. As fate would have it, nearly a century later, through Christina's heirs, the Ludovisi marbles were reunited with portions of the Ludovisi painting collection remaining in Spain through the sale of nearly all of Christina's sculptures to Elisabetta Farnese. After her death in 1689, Christina's possessions were willed to her friend and fellow art lover, Cardinal Azzolino. When Azzolino died in the same year, the Queen's holdings were sold by the heirs en masse to the Odescalchi. The collections that Christina built in Rome were of significant enough quality and size across multiple media that they were dispersed in some of the most well-known group sales of the 18th through 21st centuries, with portions having remained remarkably intact following her death. These extant groupings have led to remarkably long-lasting influence of the Queen's taste in museum collections today. As we will see in the next set of presenters, the influence is readily seen in the galleries of the Prado, which is the single largest institutional holder of large-scale artworks from the Queen's former collections outside of Sweden. Christina's significant collection of books and manuscripts have been extensively researched by Christian Kalmer and Eva Nilsson Nylander and are today housed at the Vatican. Christina's coin and medal collection was also sold to the Vatican by the Odescalchi, and Daniela Williams has recently investigated the impact of the organization and composition of it by Christina on the history of numismatic studies. Christina's significant collection of Renaissance drawings has remained largely intact and is now held at the Tylers Museum in Harlem. A group of masterworks by Michelangelo were recently the subject of an exhibition at the Cleveland Museum of Art. In 1721, Philip Duc d'Orléans purchased Christina's paintings collection en masse from her heirs, with all of the works ending up on the market in London, where in 1793, the Italian paintings caused a sensation when put up for public view. The works were purchased in large part by Britain's elite collectors, as well as US industrialists, such as Henry Clay Frick. They have, over the intervening centuries, found their ways into additional museum collections. In the parlance of today's program, Christina can be identified as a protagonist of dozens of major museums. Additions to the list of Christina's known works with provenance to her collection are made with some regularity, as in the case of this Mary Magdalene by Titian, auctioned in Germany in May of 2022. In tracing the lives of objects once owned by the Queen, a spectacular network of women patrons and collectors appear. Her St. Francis of Assisi and St. Anthony of Padua, now in the Dulwich Picture Gallery, were painted by Raphael and commissioned by the Franciscan nuns of Perugia for an altarpiece. An antique carved gem once owned by Christina, known as the Gonzaga cameo, has variously been tied to the collections built by Isabella d'Este, Josephine Bonaparte, and the Empress Catherine the Great. As part of Christina's welcome ceremonies in Rome, the Collegio Romano at St. Ignatius put on a multi-room display constructed of papier-mâché and cardboard. The first room had a theme of learned women with portraits of large faux marbles lining the pillars. Large faux metals lining the marble pillars. The second room had statues of well-respected queens and a list of virtues for each woman. The following rooms had pillars decorated with texts referring to the piety and virtue of historical queens and images of queens who had come to Rome mounted on pyramids. While a strong female provenance is not something Christina was known specifically to have looked for in her acquisitions, the period's fascination with series of famous women and the established tendency to place Christina within the context of other learned women on such lists would have certainly have made these connections notable to both the Queen and the visitors of her galleries. After her death, Christina was honored as one of the few women interred in the Vatican grottos. Her cenotaph, designed by Carlo Fontana, is based off of medals produced for a planned 100-piece medallic history of her life, which Christina commissioned from Massimiliano Soldani Benzi. The project was in direct competition with a medallic history being made for Louis the Sun King. In this example, a laureate Christina in classical dress wears a sun brooch on her shoulder on the obverse, with Roma occupying the reverse. Far from the popular image often circulated about Christina as a wild eccentric, it is this image of a learned royal protector of Roma that the Queen intended to project through her commissions and her collections. As we have explored over the last 2 days, women's essential roles in all aspects of the historical art market and the lives of objects and museum collections have long been overlooked. This is due in part to gendered structures which have long valued certain media above others, demoting women's work to craft or decorative arts categories while failing to recognize their impact as stewards, patrons, and collectors. My current research is focused on the exhibition Making Her Mark, opening in Baltimore in October and in Toronto next year, which will foreground the work of women recontextualizing their contributions to the arts of Europe in over 20 media, including lace, painting, wax, furniture, and tapestry. If this project has shown me anything, it's that the large number of early modern women who populate not only the creation histories, but the provenance histories of museum collections is incongruous with both their representation in museum databases and labels, as well as their still limited understanding of women's impact on the collection, creation, manufacture, sale, display, and excavation of art in the early modern period. Projects like the Prados are essential to the expanded recognition and research on this topic, and in lifting up the influential roles of women like Christina in the history of museums. Thank you.